Star Wars is full of insane moments that could have changed everything. And today, we're diving into the biggest and wildest what-ifs in Star Wars. From Anakin living his best life, to Yoda going full John Wick mode on the Sith. Hit that subscribe button if you love this kind of chaos, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Star Wars fans are everywhere, and I want to hear your hot takes on this what-ifs too. Now let's rewrite the history. What if Anakin Skywalker never turned to the dark side? You know, Anakin's story is one of the most famous in Star Wars. The fall of a promising Jedi into Darth Vader, one of the most iconic villains ever. But imagine, just for a moment, that he stayed true to the light. What would have happened? How different would the galaxy be? First, think about Anakin as a Jedi. From the start, he was special, born with an incredibly strong connection to the Force, even called the Chosen One. The Jedi Council believed he was meant to bring balance, but they also struggled with trusting him because of his emotions and impulsiveness. Now, if he never turned dark, that would mean he somehow overcame those struggles, held back his fears, anger, and attachment to Padme. So, what if Anakin had trusted the Jedi Council more? What if he'd learned patience, self-control, and restraint? We know from the prequels that his biggest downfall was fear of losing Padme and losing control. But if he had let go of that fear, or found healthier ways to deal with it, he wouldn't have needed Palpatine's manipulation. That would change everything. Palpatine, the Sith Lord pulling the strings, depended on Anakin's weakness to rise. Without Anakin's fall, Palpatine might not have succeeded so easily in turning the Republic into the Empire. Without Vader, the Empire loses its most powerful enforcer and symbol of terror. Could the Clone Wars have ended differently? Probably. Anakin was instrumental in many battles, but more importantly, his defection to the dark side gave the Sith a huge advantage. If he'd stayed loyal to the Jedi, maybe the war would have ended quicker, and the Republic could have survived. But here's an interesting thought. If Anakin stayed light, what about his relationship with Obi-Wan? We saw how complicated it was, but maybe it could have been stronger, a genuine mentorship. Obi-Wan could have helped Anakin grow into the Jedi he was meant to be, helping him balance his emotions and responsibilities. Their partnership might have been legendary, for all the right reasons. And what about Padme? If Anakin stayed on the Jedi path, would they have ended up together openly? Jedi weren't allowed attachments, but we've seen some Jedi bending those rules before. Maybe Anakin and Padme could have found a way to be together, maybe even starting a family, but in a way that wouldn't destroy Anakin or the Jedi Order. Imagine the influence that would have on their children, Luke and Leia. Growing up without the shadow of Vader would be a totally different childhood. No fear of their father's dark legacy, no burden of redemption. Instead, maybe they'd be trained as Jedi from the start, under a father who lived by the Jedi Code and taught them about hope and balance. But let's not forget the bigger picture. Palpatine still exists, still scheming. Even if Anakin never turned, Palpatine's plan to control the galaxy wouldn't just vanish. The Sith are patient and cunning, so maybe the Emperor would find another way to rise. But without Anakin, he'd lack his most powerful weapon, which could have delayed or even prevented the Empire's domination. Also, think about the Jedi Order itself. Their rigid rules and mistrust of Anakin's emotions pushed him away. If Anakin stayed light, maybe that means the Jedi adapted too, becoming less strict, more understanding of emotions, and attachment as part of being truly balanced in the Force. That could have changed the entire Jedi philosophy for the better. And what about the galaxy's future? Without Vader leading the Empire's brutal enforcement, the rebellion might have never needed to rise, or at least would have looked very different. The galaxy might have stayed peaceful or found balance faster, avoiding decades of oppression, conflict, and suffering. Of course, there's the question of destiny. Was Anakin's fall inevitable? Some say yes because of prophecy or fate, but what if it was all about choices? What if Anakin choosing light means free will truly mattered, changing everything? What do you think? Would the galaxy have been better with Anakin as a Jedi? Or was his turn to the dark side necessary for balance in the Force? Let me know your thoughts, because this is one of those what-ifs that can spin in so many directions. For now, keep this question in mind as we move to part 2, where we'll explore how Anakin's choice might have changed key events and people in the galaxy. So, picking up where we left off, let's think about how Anakin staying on the light side would have affected the big moments we all know so well. One of the most obvious changes is the showdown on Mustafar. Without Anakin's turn to Darth Vader, there wouldn't be a violent duel between him and Obi-Wan. That fight shaped the Star Wars saga in huge ways, from the rise of Vader as a symbol of terror to the scattering of the key players across the galaxy. But if Anakin stayed loyal, that fight might never have happened. Instead of fighting Obi-Wan, Anakin might have helped the Jedi hunt down Palpatine, or at least warn the Jedi Council about the Sith Lord's identity. Maybe the Jedi would have moved faster to stop the Emperor. That would have saved countless lives and preserved much of the Jedi's influence in the galaxy. And what about the Clone Wars? Anakin was a great general, but his aggressive style sometimes caused tension with the Jedi leadership. If he'd stayed on the light, he could have been a bridge between the clones and the Jedi, maybe finding new ways to end the war without as much destruction and suffering. Imagine the war ending sooner, with less bloodshed and more cooperation across the Republic. Now, let's talk about the Empire itself. Palpatine's entire plan relied on turning Anakin to his side. Without Vader, Palpatine loses his most powerful apprentice. The Dark Enforcer who crushed rebellions and hunted down Jedi would be missing. That alone would have seriously weakened the Empire's grip on the galaxy. Would Palpatine have found another apprentice? Possibly. The Sith always look for the strongest apprentice, but Anakin was unique. Without him, Palpatine's power might have been limited. Maybe the galaxy would have seen a longer, more drawn-out fight between Republic loyalists and Sith forces rather than a swift Empire takeover. And what about the rebellion? If the Empire never fully took control, or if it was weaker without Vader, would the rebellion even have formed the way we know it? Maybe there would have been more chances for diplomacy or political change, rather than a full-on war. The galaxy could have found a more peaceful path to freedom. Then there's the question of Luke and Leia. Without Anakin's fall, Luke wouldn't have grown up hearing stories about the terrifying Darth Vader, the man who betrayed the Jedi and his family. His childhood would have been very different, likely more stable and hopeful. That stability could have changed Luke's personality and choices. Maybe he would have become a Jedi in a very different way, without the shadow of darkness looming over him. Leia's story too. She might have had a father present in her life, shaping her as a leader in a positive way. The Skywalker legacy would have been one of hope and balance rather than tragedy and redemption. Their family could have been a symbol of peace in the galaxy. And what about Obi-Wan? He carried a heavy burden after Anakin's fall, watching over Luke while mourning his friend's choices. If Anakin stayed light, Obi-Wan's role might have been more about teaching and guiding, rather than hiding and preparing for revenge. Their bond might have grown stronger, and the Jedi Order could have been in better hands. Now, thinking about Palpatine again, without Anakin turning, he would have needed to rely on other tactics. The Sith have always been patient, but they aren't invincible. Palpatine's influence might have been limited if he couldn't use Anakin as his weapon. This might have allowed the Republic and Jedi to expose the Sith sooner, preventing decades of oppression. But let's not forget Palpatine was cunning. He might have turned someone else or found another way to rise. Still, the loss of Anakin's power as Darth Vader would have been a huge blow. Vader was more than muscle. He was a symbol, a terrifying legend, and a tool for Palpatine's control. Also, Anakin's presence as a powerful Jedi might have inspired change in the Jedi Order itself. The Order was criticized for being rigid and emotionally cold, which pushed Anakin toward frustration and fear. If he had succeeded without falling, the Jedi might have evolved to accept emotions as part of being balanced in the Force. That could have made the Order stronger, more resilient, and let's not overlook the emotional side. Anakin's fears and attachments were his greatest weakness, but also his greatest strength if handled well. If he had learned to accept his feelings without being controlled by them, he might have changed how the Force was understood altogether. Imagine a Jedi who embraces emotions, attachment, love, and still lives by the light. That would have been revolutionary. It might have changed the entire philosophy of the Jedi and Sith, blurring the lines between light and dark in a way we haven't seen. So, the galaxy, without Vader, is a very different place. Maybe more hopeful, maybe more complicated. Would the lack of Vader's fall have removed some of the depth and tragedy that makes Star Wars so compelling? Possibly, but it also opens the door for a story where hope truly wins and choices shape the future in unexpected ways. Alright, now let's jump into another fascinating what if. What if Padme Amidala didn't die after giving birth to Luke and Leia? What if she survived the trauma and lived to raise her children herself? That's a game changer for sure, because Padme wasn't just anyone. She was a queen, a senator, and someone with a strong will and vision for the galaxy. First, think about how different Luke and Leia's upbringing would have been. In the movies, they grew up separated, Leia with Bail Organa on Alderaan, and Luke with Owen and Beru Lars on Tatooine. Both grew up away from their parents, and the legacy of Anakin Skywalker's fall. But if Padme had survived, the twins might have grown up together, under her care, at least for a while. Padme was deeply political, compassionate, and wise beyond her years. Her influence on her kids would have been immense. She could have been the one guiding them through the complicated world of politics, Jedi, and the ongoing conflict. Imagine the twins growing up with a mother who fought for democracy, who believed in peace, and who had first-hand experience of the Republic's fall. Would she have told them about their father, Anakin? That's a tough one, because Anakin's story was complicated, a hero who became a villain. But Padme was honest and courageous. Maybe she would have explained the truth carefully, helping them understand their heritage without the fear and hatred that shaped their lives in the original timeline. Her survival could also mean that Leia, in particular, might have had a stronger connection to her mother's ideals. Leia was always a fighter for justice and democracy, much like Padme, so having her mother around would only deepen those values. Now, what about Luke? Growing up with Padme might have given him a different sense of identity. He wouldn't be raised as a simple moisture farmer, disconnected from his past. Instead, he might have had early exposure to the Force, politics, and the struggles that shaped the galaxy. That could have made him more prepared for the challenges he faced later on. And let's talk about Padme herself. Surviving childbirth and political chaos would have meant she had to navigate a galaxy under Imperial rule. That's no small task. She would likely have become a key figure in the rebellion, using her connections and political skills to rally support and organize resistance. But surviving Padme also means the dynamics of the rebellion change. Without her death, would Bail Organa still take Leia in? Maybe Leia's role as a senator and leader would have started much earlier, learning directly from her mother rather than Bail. That might have made the political struggle against the Empire more personal and intense. Now, there's also the question of Anakin's fall. Padme's death was a big factor in Anakin's transformation into Vader. If she survived, would that have changed his path? Maybe Anakin wouldn't have been pushed fully to the dark side, knowing Padme was still alive and the children safe. That alone could have altered the entire trajectory of the galaxy. Of course, Palpatine would still be around, still scheming, but having Padme alive and active could have been a real thorn in his side. She had the intelligence and courage to challenge him politically and rally support against the Empire. That means the rebellion might have started earlier, or with stronger leadership from the start. But surviving Padme also means personal challenges. She would have had to balance her role as a mother with her political career and the dangers surrounding the galaxy. That's a tough path, but one she seemed ready to walk. Her strength and determination were clear in the prequels, so it's easy to imagine her rising to the occasion. Another thing to consider is how Padme's survival would affect Anakin and Vader. If Anakin somehow survived his injuries on Mustafar, which is another what if we could explore, having Padme alive might have been the anchor that kept him closer to the light. She was his emotional center, the one he desperately wanted to protect. Her presence might have helped him resist Palpatine's influence or seek redemption earlier. For the kids, growing up with a mother who survived all the chaos could have created a family unit that was stronger and more united. They would have had a role model who showed them how to fight with dignity and compassion, even in the darkest times. That kind of upbringing might have changed everything about how Luke and Leia approached their destinies. So, what do you think? Would the galaxy have been better off with Padme alive to raise Luke and Leia? Could she have changed the course of the rebellion, or even prevented the rise of the Empire? It's wild to think about, and it opens so many doors for different stories and possibilities. So now that Padme is alive and raising Luke and Leia, let's jump into what happens next. The real big shifts that would have rocked the galaxy beyond just their childhoods. One of the first things to think about is how the Jedi would react. Without Padme's death, Anakin might have stayed closer to the Jedi. But the Order itself would also change. They would see a living proof that their strict rules about attachment don't always work, since Padme's survival shows the power of love and family. This could trigger a new wave of reform within the Jedi, loosening their rigidity and helping them reconnect with the Force in a more balanced way. And with Padme's strong voice advocating for compassion and democracy, Jedi and politicians might work more closely together, strengthening the fight against tyranny. Meanwhile, Palpatine's position becomes shakier than ever. His ability to manipulate Anakin hinged on exploiting his fears and losses, especially Padme's death. Without that leverage, his plan to crush the Jedi and the Republic faces unexpected obstacles. Palpatine might try to move faster, more aggressively, but he'd find a united front instead of fractured enemies. With Padme active in the Senate and secretly supporting the rebellion, she could orchestrate political moves that undermine the Empire's control. She would connect different resistance cells, using diplomacy to build a wider coalition of planets, ready to stand up against Imperial oppression. Her survival could have brought a more organized and strategic approach to the rebellion earlier than in the original timeline. Luke and Leia's training would be very different too. Instead of Leia focusing on politics alone and Luke on becoming a Jedi on his own, both might receive a combined education, Padme teaching leadership and diplomacy, while trusted Jedi guide them in the Force. That kind of upbringing might produce leaders who are both wise in politics and powerful with the Force, giving the rebellion a massive advantage. One big change comes in Anakin's story after all this. If he survives Mustafar and Padme's alive, his redemption might happen much earlier. He wouldn't have to suffer decades as Vader, committing atrocities and spreading fear. Instead, he could become a symbol of hope, a former Dark Warrior who returned to the light with his family's support. That would shift the whole idea of what redemption means in Star Wars. But that doesn't mean the path is easy. Palpatine wouldn't give up without a fight. The Emperor might attempt to strike at Padme directly, knowing she's the key to unraveling his power. That could put the family in constant danger, adding tension and stakes to their story. Padme's courage and political savvy would be tested like never before, as she balances protecting her children and leading the rebellion. Another ripple effect would be the fate of key characters like Obi-Wan and Yoda. With Anakin's fall prevented or shortened, Obi-Wan's role would be less about exile and grief, more about teaching and guiding. Yoda might help reform the Jedi Order alongside Padme's political efforts, finding new ways to heal the galaxy. Then there's the question of how this changes iconic battles. Without Vader's terror, the Empire's hold might be weaker. The Battle of Yavin, where the Death Star was destroyed, could look very different if Luke and Leia are working closely with their mother and father. Perhaps the rebellion gains an earlier victory or uses new tactics born from Padme's diplomacy and Anakin's knowledge. On a personal level, the Skywalker family could become a symbol of unity, a beacon for those who believe in hope, balance and freedom. Their story might inspire more systems to join the rebellion and resist the Empire. That ripple through the galaxy could shorten the conflict or shift its nature entirely. So, when you imagine Padme alive and raising Luke and Leia, you're not just picturing a family reunited, you're seeing the galaxy changing, politics shifting, the Jedi evolving, and the war being fought on new terms. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes one life, one survival, can change everything. Alright, this one's heavy. Obi-Wan standing over his fallen brother. It's probably one of the most iconic confrontations in Star Wars history. But what if it ended differently? What if Obi-Wan didn't just leave Anakin burning and broken, but actually delivered the final blow, and killed him then and there? At first glance, it sounds like a clean break. You get rid of Vader before he ever becomes the masked enforcer of the Empire. Maybe the galaxy avoids a lot of suffering, but once you really start to unpack it, things get complicated fast. Let's talk about Padme. In the original timeline, she died not from her wounds, but from a mix of heartbreak, trauma, and the force-pulling aftermath of Anakin's fall. Now, if Obi-Wan ends Anakin's life on Mustafar, maybe she doesn't die right away, but the trauma might still crush her. She'd just lost her husband, someone she loved deeply, someone she believed could be saved, and she'd have to live with the knowledge that her close friend Obi-Wan was the one who did it. Even if it was to stop him, it wouldn't be easy to forgive. Luke and Leia, would still be born, of course, but without Anakin alive, and maybe without Padme around for long either. The burden of raising them falls entirely on others. Probably still Bail Organa and the Lars family, unless Obi-Wan decides to take a more active role. But now he's carrying a different kind of weight, not just guilt over losing Anakin, but the fact that he ended him. That changes Obi-Wan deeply. He's not just the exiled Jedi who failed his student, he's the one who crossed the line, the one who pulled the trigger, so to speak. Maybe he sees it as necessary, but it still reshapes his identity. He might withdraw even more than he did in canon. Maybe he doesn't even try to watch over Luke. He might believe he's done too much damage already. Now, the Jedi. Most of them are already gone by this point, hunted down by Order 66, but with Anakin dead early, Palpatine loses his most powerful enforcer. That doesn't stop the Empire from rising. Let's be real, Palpatine planned everything in advance, but it makes his grip weaker. Instead of Vader hunting down the survivors, Palpatine has to rely on the Inquisitors, clone remnants, and other tools. He'd still be dangerous, but more vulnerable. That means Jedi like Ahsoka, maybe even Quinlan Vos, have a better shot at surviving longer. Maybe even Yoda and Obi-Wan consider regrouping sooner, but without Anakin as Vader, the myth of the powerful Dark Enforcer never takes hold. The fear factor the Empire used to dominate systems might not spread as deeply. That might sound like a win for the rebellion, but it's also a bit messier. Because here's the thing, without Vader, the entire shape of the rebellion shifts. Palpatine would respond differently. Maybe he puts more pressure on the Senate sooner. Maybe Bail Organa gets found out early. Maybe Leia's cover as an Imperial Senator doesn't last. The game gets more paranoid, more underground, faster. There's also the question of legacy. The Skywalker name, without Vader, becomes this open wound. The Jedi know what happened. A Jedi Knight, one of their best, fell to darkness and was killed by his own master. That story would haunt the survivors. Would they tell Luke and Leia the truth? Would they pretend Anakin died a hero to avoid scarring them? Or would the truth leak out anyway, leaving Luke to grow up knowing his father was killed by Obi-Wan and never understanding why? The impact on Luke's journey is massive. There's no Vader in a mask breathing down his neck, no reveal of "I am your father," no desperate attempt to redeem him. Luke's mission becomes something else entirely, maybe still a Jedi path, but now it's about rebuilding, about restoring the Order with no personal stake in bringing someone back from the dark. And Leia? She still becomes a leader, but her family history gets buried or reshaped. Maybe she never learns who her father was. Maybe she's told a cleaned-up version. Or maybe, years later, she finds the truth buried in the Jedi archives and has to wrestle with it on her own. Meanwhile, Palpatine doesn't just sit back. With Anakin gone, he starts searching for a replacement. Maybe he tries to recruit someone else with raw power. Maybe he focuses on turning Luke when he's older. The Sith have always been about legacy and survival, and Palpatine's whole plan revolved around that. He'd find someone, or create someone, to carry that torch. Maybe someone like Galen Marek, or even try to mold Leia. That's where the real tension starts building. With Vader gone, the Sith throne is empty, and Palpatine won't leave it that way for long. So now the story isn't about redeeming a fallen father, but resisting a completely new form of darkness that's less personal, but maybe even more dangerous. And Obi-Wan? He disappears into the shadows, carrying the weight of killing Anakin, the man who once called him brother. He never hears the words "Father," shouted from behind the mask. He never gets a moment of redemption or peace from that bond, just silence. He might wonder for the rest of his life whether there was another way. The galaxy moves forward without Darth Vader's looming shadow, but that doesn't mean peace comes quickly or easily. The absence of Vader reshapes key moments from here on. First, the Battle of Yavin. In the original timeline, Leia's mission to steal Death Star plans hinged on escape from Vader's Star Destroyer, his relentless pursuit injecting terror into every corridor. Without Vader in his black suit and mask, the Death Star assault still happens, but the Empire's starfighter response is less coordinated. Tarkin still orders Leia's ship destroyed, but without Vader orchestrating the chase, more X-Wings slip through. The rebellion scores a decisive victory, with fewer losses, fewer pilots scarred by close calls, and morale skyrockets across rebel bases. Leia's fame as a senator who survived the Empire's might burns brighter, inspiring more systems to pledge support. Meanwhile, Luke Skywalker trains on Yavin 4 under Obi-Wan's distant watch and Yoda's guidance. Without the personal pull to confront a masked father, Luke's focus remains on mastering Jedi skills and understanding the Force's living balance. His lessons emphasize overcoming fear without the constant worry of Vader's wrath. At the same time, Leia, already proven in the Senate, begins covert Force training under Mon Mothma's permission, blending political savvy with Force sensitivity. Together, they form a unique sibling team, each leveraging their strengths. Luke in meditation and lightsaber practice, Leia in strategy and negotiation. Across the galaxy, Palpatine realizes that eliminating Vader created a power vacuum the Sith cannot afford. He accelerates Project Inquisitor, recruiting Force-sensitive hunters to fill the void. Without the single focal point of Vader, the Empire's strategy fragments into smaller, more dangerous factions. Inquisitors, remnant Jedi hunters, and rogue Moffs competing for influence. The rebellion capitalizes on these fractures, launching coordinated strikes on fleets distracted by internal rivalries. Imperial command becomes a tangled web rather than a unified iron fist. In political arenas, Senator Bail Organa leverages Vader's absence to press for open debate in the Imperial Senate. He exposes resource hogging by key Moffs and cites leaked Senate records showing Palpatine's early deception. At first, these moves are shut down with emergency Imperial edicts, but without Vader to intimidate dissenters, more senators speak privately with Organa. A small but growing bloc begins to plot legislative resistance, giving the rebellion valuable inside information. On the ground, Ashoka Tano emerges from exile when she hears rumors of a new Inquisitor project. She reaches out to Obi-Wan and Yoda, offering her unique perspective on Anakin's fall. Together they train a new cadre of Jedi acolytes in secret, people who never experienced Order 66 but remember the ancient teachings. This clandestine temple, on an uncharted moon, becomes a beacon for Force-sensitive refugees, creating a grassroots Jedi revival that spreads hope to ordinary citizens oppressed by the Empire. Time marches toward the Battle of Hoth, but now the Empire fields an Inquisitor squadron rather than Vader's Star Destroyers. They track Echo Base, but in their overconfidence, they underestimate Rebel ingenuity. Thanks to Leia's political connections, the rebellion diverts Imperial attention with feints on Corellia and Alderaan. The bulk of the Inquisitors arrives at Hoth too late, and the evacuation is smoother, with fewer casualties. Luke and Leia lead small strike teams that sabotage turrets and escort civilians to transports. Their bond, shaped by growing up under Padme's ideals of service, shines through as they rescue wounded troopers and laugh through blaster fire, rallying everyone with genuine warmth. Meanwhile, Mon Mothma and Organa draft a secret resolution in the Falcon's refurbished hold, calling for an emergency vote to curtail Palpatine's emergency powers. Without Vader's fear factor, the resolution gains traction, forcing Palpatine's hand. He dissolves the Senate entirely, proclaiming martial law sooner. That moment backfires. Systems once loyal balk at direct rule, and support for the rebellion surges. Palpatine's gamble to tighten his grip actually undermines Imperial legitimacy more than any rebel victory. As the timeline progresses to Endor, the final Death Star doesn't have Vader's personal vendetta to motivate its defenses. The shield generator stands unguarded by the Dark Lord's Force presence, vulnerable to coordinated commando teams. Luke leads a daring ground assault with Han and Leia, while the rebel fleet, unchallenged by Vader's wingman skills, outmaneuvers the Imperial Navy. When the second Death Star explodes, the Emperor's body count is high, but without Vader's last-minute redemption and sacrifice, there's no dramatic father-son moment. Instead, the galaxy erupts in celebration, knowing that two Sith had been eliminated, Palpatine and the would-be Darth Vader. After the victory, the New Republic forms with a constitution that explicitly limits Force-sensitive involvement in government. Luke, Leia, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan guide development of a new Jedi Council, one that preserves history transparently and admits mistakes. Their shared experiences, growing up under Imperial rule without a redeemed father figure, fuel their cautious optimism. They build a galaxy worth saving, shaped by loss, but unburdened by a dark secret that required redemption. So, when you imagine Obi-Wan drawing his lightsaber one final time to end Anakin's life, you see a galaxy that still fights desperately for freedom, but in roads less traveled. The rebellion rises earlier, political alliances shift, and the Jedi rebirth emerges not from tragedy, but from a decision to end a life before it became legend. In the end, perhaps the greatest question is whether a galaxy without Vader's redemption tale is still a galaxy worth telling, or if that very act of mercy, allowing him to live, was always part of what made hope endure. What do you think? So let's rewind the whole thing back to the Phantom Menace. Anakin is 9 years old, living as a slave on Tatooine, dreaming of freedom, flight, and something greater. Qui-Gon Jinn meets him, senses the Force in him like nothing he's ever felt before, and immediately latches onto the idea that this kid is the chosen one. But in the main timeline, Qui-Gon dies. Obi-Wan promises to train the boy, and things go, well, let's say not great. But what if Qui-Gon survived that duel with Darth Maul on Naboo and personally trained Anakin himself? This changes everything right from the start. First, Qui-Gon was never a traditional Jedi. He was one of those grey area thinkers, someone who trusted the living Force more than the rigid structure of the Jedi Council. He didn't worship tradition, he questioned it. So imagine what kind of master he would have been for Anakin, someone who wouldn't have forced him to bottle up emotions or pretend attachments didn't matter. Qui-Gon wouldn't have made Anakin feel broken for caring. That's a huge deal. Anakin's entire fall started with fear and secrecy. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, and having to hide every meaningful part of himself from the Jedi because of their rules. But Qui-Gon, he would have addressed that head-on. He would have taught Anakin to manage his emotions, not suppress them. That difference alone could have prevented years of inner conflict. Instead of growing up thinking love was forbidden, Anakin might have learned how to process attachment in a healthy way. We'd also likely see a much different Anakin in terms of attitude and development. Obi-Wan, as much as he cared, was still very young when he took on Anakin, barely a Jedi Knight himself. He treated Anakin like a student and sometimes like a burden. Qui-Gon would have treated him like a partner, not an obligation. He was older, more seasoned, more confident in following his instincts. That guidance would have given Anakin a stable foundation, something he sorely lacked. Now that doesn't mean Anakin would have had an easy ride. Qui-Gon had his flaws. He could be stubborn, often clashing with the Council, and he might have dragged Anakin into conflict with the Jedi Order earlier than anyone else did. But ironically, that might have been a good thing. Imagine a version of Anakin who from the very start is encouraged to question Jedi dogma with guidance rather than being punished for it. That kind of healthy challenge might have shaken up the Jedi Order itself. And Palpatine? He would have had a much harder time getting into Anakin's head. One of the biggest reasons Palpatine manipulated Anakin so easily was because he filled a vacuum. He offered support and validation when Anakin felt ignored or misunderstood by the Jedi. If Qui-Gon had been his master, that vacuum never exists. Anakin wouldn't have needed a secret mentor whispering in his ear if he already had someone who listened and understood him. But don't get it twisted. Palpatine wouldn't just give up. He would have shifted tactics, maybe tried to frame Qui-Gon as a liability or threat to the Council. Maybe he would have attempted to create conflict between Qui-Gon and the Order, hoping to isolate Anakin in the fallout. But Qui-Gon wasn't dumb. He was cautious and intuitive, and if anyone in the Jedi ranks was going to see through the Chancellor's game early on, it would have been him. The Clone Wars might have played out very differently too. If Qui-Gon was still alive by the time war broke out, he might not have even agreed to become a general. He believed the Jedi were drifting too far from their spiritual purpose, and the idea of leading clone armies could have disgusted him. Maybe he convinces Anakin not to serve either. Maybe the two of them take a more independent role, helping people where they're needed rather than falling into line with the Republic military. Imagine that, Anakin fighting the war his way, with a master who actually supports that choice. Now the Jedi Council wouldn't have liked that, not one bit. They'd probably label Qui-Gon and Anakin as reckless, unorthodox, possibly even disloyal. But again, that friction might have worked in their favour. The more distance they put between themselves and the politics of Coruscant, the harder it would have been for Palpatine to control them. They'd be wild cards, unpredictable, not just pawns in the chessboard, Palpatine had carefully built. And of course, there's Padme. That relationship still happens. Anakin and Padme still cross paths during the war, feelings develop, and the connection is deep. But the difference is, Anakin wouldn't have needed to keep it secret from Qui-Gon. He might have even asked him for advice. Instead of bottling everything up, terrified of being expelled from the Order, he could have talked through his fears about losing her, his visions, his anxieties. Qui-Gon, of all people, would have helped him face those emotions without being consumed by them. That's a version of Anakin we never got to see, a version where he's not defined by guilt, fear, or secrecy, a version where he becomes the Jedi he was meant to be. But it's not just about Anakin. Qui-Gon's survival would have had ripple effects throughout the galaxy. His continued influence might have changed Obi-Wan's path too. Maybe Obi-Wan takes on a different Padawan, one better suited to his more by-the-book mindset. Maybe the Council learns to reconsider its stance on emotions and attachments. Qui-Gon's constant pushback might have forced them to evolve earlier, before it was too late. And the biggest wildcard, Qui-Gon's deep belief in the Chosen One prophecy. He truly believed Anakin was meant to bring balance to the Force, but he never assumed that meant joining the dark side to do it. If he'd lived to guide Anakin all the way through that journey, maybe the prophecy would have played out in a much cleaner way. No Vader, no Empire, no galaxy-spanning tragedy. So we're now deep into the Clone Wars era, and this time, Anakin's journey under Qui-Gon looks radically different from what we saw in the movies. He's not a Jedi general blindly following orders from the Republic. He's more of a force on his own, operating in that space between official Jedi doctrine and personal morality. That's all Qui-Gon's influence. And because of that, Anakin doesn't become the war hero the Republic loves to parade around, but he earns respect in a different way. On the battlefield, he's still a brilliant tactician and pilot, but his missions often avoid senseless destruction, and he takes unnecessary civilian losses personally. He's not trying to impress anyone, he's trying to do what's right, which hits different when it's not being filtered through Jedi politics or Senate approval ratings. Now, without the constant pressure of the Jedi Council breathing down his neck, Anakin has more freedom to define himself. He doesn't feel trapped in their rules, so he's less likely to rebel in explosive ways. Qui-Gon still holds him accountable, but the dynamic between them is built on trust, not discipline. There are disagreements, sure, but they argue like father and son, not master and subordinate. And with that emotional stability, his connection to Padme evolves into something more balanced. They're still in love, still navigating the chaos of war and secrecy, but Anakin isn't hiding their relationship out of shame or fear of getting expelled from the Order. Qui-Gon knows, and while he may not fully approve, he guides Anakin through it instead of shutting him down. That changes everything. Think about those visions Anakin had of Padme dying. The secrecy is what gave Palpatine the opportunity to sink his claws in. With Qui-Gon in the picture, Anakin wouldn't have bottled that up. He would have gone to his master and laid it all out. And Qui-Gon would have listened, not dismissed it like the Council did. Maybe he wouldn't have had all the answers, but he would have at least helped Anakin see the bigger picture instead of spiraling. And speaking of Palpatine, in the original timeline, Palpatine played the long game with Anakin, slowly positioning himself as a mentor, a father figure, a voice of reason against the out-of-touch Jedi. But if Qui-Gon was there, always one step ahead, Palpatine wouldn't have had that opening. He would have noticed Qui-Gon's influence early on and known this kid wasn't going to be so easy to turn. Palpatine might have tried to manipulate the Jedi Council instead, maybe use them to push Qui-Gon and Anakin out of the Order or discredit them. But if anything, that would have just reinforced Qui-Gon's suspicions. At some point, the conflict would have reached a breaking point. The Jedi Council would probably start to see Anakin as more of an outsider. Not dangerous, but unpredictable. The kind of Jedi who doesn't attend meetings or follow protocol, someone they can't fully trust. Qui-Gon would get heat too, accused of being too lenient, too independent. Eventually, the Council might even pressure them to step away, either subtly through reassignment or directly through confrontation. And that could be the turning point. Qui-Gon and Anakin might leave the Order altogether, not in anger or out of spite, but because they no longer believe the Council represents what the Jedi were supposed to be. They don't join the Sith. They don't fall. They just walk a different path. They become something new. Imagine them forming a kind of rogue Jedi faction, not aligned with any government, operating from the Outer Rim. They train Force-sensitive outcasts, rescue children from war zones, and help people without politics getting in the way. It's not flashy, it's not public, but it grows, word spreads. They're not bound by the same rules, but they're still protecting peace, still listening to the Force. Over time, that starts to attract Jedi who are disillusioned with the war. Quietly, without fanfare, a new Jedi movement begins. Now let's talk about the big events. Order 66, the fall of the Jedi Temple, Palpatine's final push. In this version of the timeline, Palpatine still moves forward with his plan. He still manipulates the Senate into giving him emergency powers, still builds the clones, still triggers the war. But without Anakin by his side, he loses his strongest weapon. There's no march on the Jedi Temple, no slaughter of younglings. Instead, Palpatine's attack comes across as a blunt strike from a paranoid leader, not a precision move guided by a dark apprentice. The public reacts differently. More people question the narrative. Some Jedi survive, and those who do scatter, not out of fear, but to join the movement Qui-Gon and Anakin started years earlier. Palpatine still crowns himself Emperor, but his empire is weaker from the start. The resistance forms faster. The Jedi aren't extinct. They're just underground, reorganizing, rebuilding. Anakin never falls to the dark side, never becomes Vader, and the galaxy avoids 2 decades of rule by a Sith Lord in a black suit. Luke and Leia, when they're born, inherit a galaxy that's scarred but not broken. They grow up knowing their father, learning from both Padme and Anakin, and eventually they join the very movement that their parents helped create. Luke doesn't need to redeem his father. His father never left. Leia doesn't have to juggle politics with family secrets. And the Force isn't seen as some mysterious, dangerous thing. It's alive in the open again. So yeah, one change, Qui-Gon surviving and training Anakin, sends the entire story down a new path. The Jedi evolve, the Empire never fully solidifies, and Anakin becomes the Jedi we always hoped he could be. Not perfect, not without flaws, but real. Guided, supported, and allowed to question the world around him without being pushed into a corner. In the end, Qui-Gon wouldn't just change Anakin's fate, he'd challenge the foundations of the Jedi Order. And maybe that's exactly what needed to happen all along. Let's start from the moment Anakin arrives at the Jedi Temple. Qui-Gon brings him in, says he believes this boy might be the chosen one, and the Jedi Council listens, not with doubt or disapproval, just curiosity. They've never seen someone like Anakin, and while his age and background are unusual, they approach it as a challenge worth taking seriously. They don't try to hold him at arm's length or treat him as a problem waiting to happen. They accept that he's different, but they decide early on that difference isn't something to fear. He's still trained as a Jedi, but the atmosphere is different. Instead of a quiet tension around him, the other Jedi treat him like a student they want to understand, not someone they're monitoring. He goes to class, learns with the other Padawans, and while his connection to the Force is stronger than most, it doesn't isolate him. The temple becomes a place where he feels like he belongs, even if he still has questions and emotions that don't always line up with the Jedi way. Obi-Wan takes him on as an apprentice with full support from the Council. He doesn't feel like he's stepping into a role just because Qui-Gon died. He's trained, guided, and backed by the Order from the start. That makes his relationship with Anakin more balanced. He's not just trying to honor a promise, he's building something from the ground up, and he knows he can go to the other masters for advice when needed. That helps both of them grow together, instead of being locked in a loop of pressure and high expectations. Anakin's early years in the Order aren't perfect, but the difference is in how the Jedi respond. He still struggles with emotion, still thinks about his mother, still has days where anger rises fast, but he's not punished for it. He's taught how to understand it, how to sit with it, how to let it pass without pretending it's not there. Jedi like Plo Koon or Shak Ti might take time to train with him personally, giving him new perspectives, new techniques. They don't treat emotion like something to push away, they treat it like something to work through. Over time, Anakin builds stronger relationships inside the Order. He's not trying to earn respect every day. He already has it. He doesn't need to prove himself constantly or hide parts of who he is. That kind of stability makes a big difference when the Clone Wars begin. When the Jedi start taking on roles as generals, Anakin steps into it with more confidence, not just because of his skills, but because he knows the Order trusts him. They listen to his concerns, take his feedback seriously, and give him responsibilities that reflect what he's capable of. He still works with Obi-Wan, but their partnership isn't weighed down by miscommunication. They talk through things. They disagree sometimes, sure, but it doesn't create distance. It sharpens their thinking. They're allowed to challenge each other without it becoming personal. That trust keeps them aligned when the war gets messy. The war itself still causes stress. Anakin sees things that are hard to process. He watches soldiers get injured, makes decisions that affect entire planets, deals with the politics of the Senate dragging its feet. But when he comes back to Coruscant, he has a place to talk. He doesn't bury it. He meets with masters who listen, who ask questions, who help him reflect. There's a system of support in place, and it's active. Anakin's connection with Padme still forms. He still falls in love. But in this version, he's not carrying it in total secrecy. Maybe he doesn't go around announcing it, but he's not waking up every day terrified someone will find out. Obi-Wan might know. Maybe Yoda or Mace Windu suspect it, but instead of waiting for a moment to punish him, they see it as something to work through. They ask questions. They give advice. They keep communication open. And Anakin, for the first time, feels like he doesn't have to split his life in two. That gives him more room to think clearly when the visions come later. He doesn't immediately panic. He doesn't see them as a death sentence. He talks to someone. Padme hears about them. Obi-Wan probably does too. Maybe even a council member he trusts. They don't all agree on what to do, but they talk it through. And that act alone, speaking the fear out loud, keeps him from spiraling. Meanwhile, Palpatine is still there, still trying to manipulate him. But it's not the same situation. Palpatine isn't the only one Anakin listens to. He's not the only voice offering guidance. When he tries to push Anakin toward distrust or secrecy, it doesn't land the same way. Anakin has other people to go to, and he's used to talking openly. That makes Palpatine's usual tactics far less effective. At this stage, everything is still fragile. The war is ongoing, the future is unclear, and Anakin still has to make tough decisions. But the key difference is in how he sees himself. He doesn't feel like he's walking a tightrope, waiting to fall. He's not confused about who actually believes in him. That's going to be the biggest change as we move into part 2, where the pressure starts to rise, where Palpatine makes his move, and where the Council's trust in Anakin might be the one thing that holds the entire galaxy together. So, with Anakin already growing inside a system that supports him, things begin to shift when the war reaches its peak. The Council still assigns him difficult missions. The pressure still builds. But now, Anakin has room to handle it. He doesn't spend every hour second-guessing the people around him or trying to hide parts of his life. When Palpatine starts acting closer and more controlling, Anakin picks up on it. He's aware something feels off, and this time he brings it up to people who are actually willing to listen. Maybe it starts with a small moment, Palpatine suggesting that the Jedi are becoming too political. Anakin doesn't agree, but instead of pushing that feeling aside, he talks to Obi-Wan. They discuss it directly. He tells him what Palpatine said, how it made him feel, and they don't let it sit for weeks. They ask questions, check things out, and stay alert. That alone starts to chip away at the influence Palpatine might have had. By this point, the Jedi Council isn't perfect, but they've learned how to handle Anakin's unique position without treating him like a problem. They know he's powerful, they know he has attachments, but they also know he responds to honesty. So when they hear Anakin's concerns about the Chancellor, they don't try to manipulate him or push him into a corner. They explain what they know, what they're watching, and they loop him into the conversation instead of keeping him in the dark. This changes how Anakin views the Council's request to spy on Palpatine. In the original timeline, it felt like betrayal. He was being told to go behind the back of someone he thought of as a friend, and the people telling him to do it never really trusted him in the first place. But here, with trust already built, it's not a one-sided command, it's a joint decision. They explain why it matters, why they need someone close to the Chancellor who can keep an eye on things, and Anakin actually agrees, because it's a conversation, not an order thrown at him in a moment of doubt. He starts paying attention to Palpatine's behaviour more carefully. And when the talk of Darth Plagueis comes up, The idea of manipulating the Force to stop death, it doesn't hit the same way. Anakin doesn't grab onto it out of panic. He doesn't stay up nights chasing visions with no one to talk to. He brings it back to Padme, maybe even the Council. They discuss it. It becomes a topic, not a secret he has to bury. And when Padme starts having her own worries about Anakin changing, about politics breaking down, he listens. He doesn't brush it off or hide from her. They sit with it. They talk it out. Maybe it doesn't solve everything, but it keeps things grounded. Now picture the moment when Palpatine finally reveals himself as a Sith Lord. Anakin knows the signs by then. He's already uneasy. He's already told Obi-Wan something feels wrong. When the moment happens, it's not a sudden explosion, it's confirmation. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't run off confused. He goes to the Council right away. They prepare for a real confrontation, one they're ready for because Anakin helped them get there. Mace Windu and a team still go to arrest Palpatine, but this time, Anakin goes with them, and not as a tag-along. He's there because he earned his place in that room. He's informed, calm, and prepared. When Palpatine attacks, Anakin doesn't freeze up. He sees clearly what's happening. There's no internal fight between loyalty and fear. There's no panic about what might happen to Padme. The emotions are still real, but they're not blocking his vision. He's been prepared to deal with this moment for a long time. The battle ends quickly. Palpatine doesn't survive. There's no empire waiting to rise, and Anakin doesn't become Darth Vader. But it doesn't just stop there. The war still needs to end. The clones are still spread across the galaxy. The Republic is still struggling with corruption. But now, Anakin is one of the voices helping to close the war, not someone tearing it down. He speaks up in the Senate. He works alongside Obi-Wan and the other Jedi to dismantle what Palpatine built. He's respected, not just for his power, but because of how he handled things when they mattered. Ahsoka, who left the Order earlier, might return. Maybe not to stay forever, but to help. She sees that things have changed. The Jedi aren't what they used to be, and that's a good thing. Anakin's growth becomes part of that change. His story, once shaped by fear and secrecy, turns into something steady and earned. The Republic itself may go through a rough phase. It won't be perfect overnight, but the biggest threat, the manipulation from within, is gone. And without the shadow of Vader, the Jedi Order has a chance to rebuild better, without being blind to emotion or slow to adapt. This version of Anakin never had to break. He never had to lose everything to find his place. He was guided from the start, trusted when it counted, and that made all the difference. That doesn't turn him into a flawless person, but it gives him the tools to figure things out before it's too late. And in the end, the entire galaxy feels the result. The Clone Wars have been raging for years. The galaxy is torn apart, star systems caught between Republic and Separatist forces, cities bombed, entire populations displaced. This is a time of chaos and uncertainty. The Republic, struggling to maintain control, leans heavily on Chancellor Palpatine. He holds emergency powers granted by the Senate, giving him vast authority over the war effort and the government. Palpatine has become a central figure, calm, calculating, the steady hand guiding the Republic through the storm. But now imagine this. Palpatine dies suddenly. The shock to the Republic is immediate. Palpatine has been the face of the government and the war for so long that without him, the system feels unsteady. The Senate is thrown into turmoil. Without a clear successor, senators argue about what to do. Some want to hold new elections. Others believe a council or committee should govern temporarily. The political infighting slows decision-making at a time when the galaxy needs unity most. Without Palpatine's strong leadership, disagreements grow and uncertainty spreads. The Jedi Council finds itself in a difficult position. They have been generals in the war, fighting alongside clone armies under Palpatine's command. They trusted him and followed his orders, but his death forces them to reconsider everything. Questions about the war's origins and hidden agendas arise. They start noticing contradictions and unexplained moves during the conflict. Without Palpatine to guide or control events, these inconsistencies come into sharper focus. The Council debates how to move forward without their usual chain of command. On the Separatist side, Count Dooku sees the sudden death as an opportunity. Without Palpatine managing the larger Sith plan, Dooku acts more freely. He pushes harder for the Separatists' cause, rallying new systems to their side with promises of independence and better futures. The droid armies launch strikes with increased boldness and less hesitation, exploiting weaknesses in the Republic's defenses. Dooku's leadership shifts the war into a more unpredictable phase. Within the Republic's military, chaos begins to set in. Palpatine's emergency powers allowed him to cut through bureaucracy and push resources quickly where needed. Now, the Senate tries to regain control, but struggles to coordinate the war effort efficiently. Commanders face more red tape, supply lines suffer delays, and communication becomes inconsistent. The organized war machine that once marched smoothly starts to slow, giving the Separatists advantages in some sectors. Anakin Skywalker feels the loss sharply. Palpatine had been a mentor and friend, someone who understood and valued him when others doubted. With the Chancellor gone, Anakin is left to face his duties with fewer anchors. The Jedi Council remains watchful, wary of his emotions and decisions. The pressure mounts, but without Palpatine's manipulations, Anakin's path may shift away from darkness. Still, the burden of the war, the fear of loss, and the frustration over the Republic's faltering make his situation difficult. For the average citizen, the war drags on with no end in sight. Systems suffer occupation, trade routes are blocked, and basic needs become harder to meet. The disappearance of Palpatine does not bring relief or hope. Instead, it creates confusion. People wonder who is in charge, what the future holds, and how long the suffering will last. The Jedi intensify their efforts to uncover hidden truths. They suspect there is more to the war than meets the eye, but without full knowledge of the Sith's involvement, their investigations face limits. Tensions within the Council rise as opinions differ on how to act. Some urge caution, others call for aggressive moves to restore order. As time passes, the conflict becomes more fragmented. Without Palpatine's guiding hand, the balance shifts. The Republic's control weakens, while the Separatists gain ground. The galaxy stands at a crossroads. What will happen depends on how the Jedi handle this new reality, how the Senate manages the political chaos, and how Dooku seizes his chance to reshape the war and the galaxy. This new phase of the Clone Wars is less predictable, more chaotic. Every decision has greater consequences. The absence of Palpatine changes everything, not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through the slow unraveling of the systems he held together. The galaxy waits, unsure what will come next. Picking up from where we left off, let's look closer at what happens next once Palpatine is out of the picture early on. The Clone Wars are raging, but the mastermind behind the conflict is suddenly gone. That alone changes the stakes for everyone involved. Without Sidious quietly guiding both sides, the Separatists lose their secret command center. Count Dooku, though powerful and charismatic, is left without his Sith master to back him up or pull the strings behind the scenes. Now, Count Dooku was originally a Jedi before turning to the dark side, but he didn't have the same long game or patience as Palpatine. So with Palpatine dead, does Dooku try to consolidate power himself? Possibly, but he's always been more of a figurehead for the Separatists rather than their real ruler. Without Palpatine's strategic brilliance, the Separatist forces might become more fragmented and disorganized. This could lead to infighting, a weaker opposition to the Republic, and potentially an earlier end to the war. But what if Dooku fails to hold it together? That might open the door for other Separatist leaders to take charge, maybe even more ruthless warlords, who care less about ideology and more about conquest. Meanwhile, on the Republic side, things look different as well. The Jedi, who have been stretched thin during the war, suddenly find themselves in a less complicated political situation. Without Palpatine's manipulation, the Jedi Council could regain some of its former respect and authority. Maybe they stop being seen as tools of a secret agenda and get to focus on their original purpose: peacekeeping and protecting the innocent. But here's a question for you. Do you think the Jedi would handle this opportunity well? Or could they fall into the same traps of bureaucracy and pride that led to their downfall in the original timeline? And what about Anakin? Without Palpatine's influence, whispering in his ear, maybe Anakin doesn't spiral into darkness. He's still conflicted and hot-headed, but his bond with Obi-Wan and the Jedi Council might strengthen. Perhaps they notice his struggles more and offer better support. Maybe the Jedi work harder to help him overcome his fears instead of pushing him away. If Anakin stays on the light side, how does that change the entire saga? Imagine him as a Jedi Knight fighting for peace instead of becoming Darth Vader. How different would the fate of the galaxy be? But it's not just Anakin's story that changes. Without Palpatine's Order 66, the Jedi don't face that brutal betrayal. They remain the guardians of the galaxy, and the Republic might avoid sliding into the Empire's authoritarian rule. That's huge. The Jedi could continue guiding the Republic, and the Clone Wars could end with a negotiated peace rather than the rise of a dictatorship. Still, peace doesn't come easy. The Republic was already facing corruption, greed, and internal struggles. Without Palpatine's iron grip, those problems don't just vanish. In fact, the political chaos might intensify. Senators jockey for power, and without a strong leader, factions could form, pushing the Republic toward instability in other ways. The Sith may be gone for now, but power struggles always find a way to shake things up. Would the galaxy be ready for a more fragile peace? That's something to think about. Another twist to consider is what happens to the Jedi's relationship with the public. In the original story, the Jedi lose the trust of many and their close ties to Palpatine. Without that stain, the Jedi might be seen as heroes again. But what if their active role in a long war makes civilians grow tired or skeptical? Could they face backlash for being involved in battles and politics? Would this shape the Jedi's future philosophy, maybe pushing them to change their ways or question their place in the galaxy? And then there's the matter of the Sith. Palpatine was the last link in a chain going back thousands of years, and his death might break that chain for a time. But the dark side never truly disappears. Someone somewhere could rise to claim the Sith legacy. Maybe Darth Maul returns to seek revenge, or perhaps a new Sith apprentice emerges from the shadows. Would the Sith threat return stronger or weaker without Palpatine's cunning? Or would the galaxy enjoy a rare temporary peace before darkness resurfaces in another form? Finally, thinking about the wider galaxy, the systems caught in the war suffer regardless of who leads. The citizens, soldiers, and worlds devastated by conflict would still need rebuilding and healing. Even without Palpatine's tyranny, the scars of war take time to mend. So the question becomes, how would the galaxy rebuild after a Palpatine-less Clone Wars? Could leaders rise who value diplomacy and unity over power and control? Would new heroes emerge to guide the galaxy toward a brighter future? There's so much to unpack here, and every answer seems to lead to more questions. That's the beauty of Star Wars what-if stories. They open doors to possibilities we never really considered. So, what do you think? Would the death of Palpatine lead to peace, or just a different kind of chaos? Would Anakin find happiness on the light side, or would the dark side still claim him in some other way? I'd love to hear your thoughts, because this question changes everything we know about the galaxy far, far away. Count Dooku is one of those Star Wars characters who stands out, partly because he's so calm and composed, but also because his story feels like a tragedy. Once a respected Jedi Master, he left the Order and became Darth Tyrannus, the Sith apprentice who helped ignite the Clone Wars. But what if he never left? What if Dooku stayed loyal to the Jedi and never turned to the dark side? That would change a lot, so let's break it down. First, it's important to remember why Dooku left in the first place. He was disillusioned with the Republic's corruption, the Jedi's growing arrogance, and what he saw as their failure to keep peace. He believed the Jedi had lost their way, and the Republic was doomed to crumble under its own weight. So he walked away, which eventually led him straight into the arms of Palpatine and the Sith. But what if instead of leaving, Dooku had chosen to fight for change from inside the Order? Someone with his skills, charisma, and political connections staying on the Jedi Council could have made a big difference. Imagine him using his influence to push for reforms, calling out corruption in the Senate, or even challenging the Jedi Council's rigid rules. Could Dooku have been the voice that helped the Jedi course correct before things went too far? The Clone Wars might look very different with Dooku still as a Jedi. Instead of leading the Separatists, he would be leading Republic forces, bringing a strategic mind and powerful leadership to the battlefield. Do you think having him on the Jedi side would have shortened the war? Or maybe his diplomatic skills could have helped avoid the conflict altogether by brokering peace deals? On a personal level, Dooku staying loyal might also affect Anakin Skywalker's path. In the original timeline, Dooku is a direct opponent, the one Anakin defeats only to see him betray the Jedi later. But if Dooku stayed with the Jedi, he might have taken a role mentoring young Jedi or even working with Anakin. How different would Anakin's training and choices be with Dooku as an ally rather than an enemy? That leads to a bigger question. If Dooku never left, would Palpatine's plan to destroy the Jedi still succeed? Palpatine was counting on Dooku to help him divide and conquer, to destabilize the Republic and the Jedi Order from within. Without Dooku turning, Palpatine loses one of his key tools. Would Palpatine try to manipulate someone else? Or could the Jedi detect his schemes sooner, with Dooku's insight helping uncover the Sith's presence? But there's another side to this. Dooku wasn't just disillusioned, he was also proud and believed deeply in his vision of order and control. That made him vulnerable to Palpatine's influence, because Sidious promised a way to create a stronger, more stable galaxy. If Dooku stayed with the Jedi, would those ambitions still simmer under the surface? Could he have become a rival within the Order, pushing for a more authoritarian Jedi approach? There's also the question of how other characters react. Obi-Wan, for example, had a complex relationship with Dooku, having been his Padawan at one point. Would their bond have grown stronger, or would ideological differences cause friction? And what about Yoda and the other council members? Would they accept Dooku's push for change or resist it? One interesting angle to explore is the impact on the Sith themselves. Without Dooku's defection, Palpatine's rise might be harder or take a different shape. Palpatine was always patient and manipulative, but losing Dooku as a partner in his dark plans might force him to act differently, or sooner. Could this change the timing or outcome of the Clone Wars entirely? So what do you think? Would Dooku have been a force for good inside the Jedi Order? Ashoka Tano is one of the most compelling characters to come out of the Star Wars universe. Her story isn't just about a skilled Jedi, but about growth, trust and betrayal. She joined the Jedi Order as Anakin's apprentice and quickly became a fan favourite. But what really shook fans was her decision to leave the Order after being wrongly accused of a crime. That moment was pivotal for her and for the whole saga. But what if she never left? What if Ahsoka stayed loyal to the Jedi Order through all the trials and turmoil? How would that change everything? First, let's think about what made Ahsoka leave. She felt betrayed, abandoned, and hurt by the Order's lack of faith in her. Even though she was innocent, the Jedi Council allowed her to be put on trial and then didn't fully support her afterward. That broke her trust. So, if the Jedi had stood by her more firmly, if she felt valued and protected, maybe she would have stayed. But would staying change her character? Would she still grow into the strong, independent force we love? With Ahsoka staying, her relationship with Anakin would also be different. She was one of the few people who really understood Anakin's struggles, but their paths diverged once she left. Maybe with her presence, Anakin could have found more support. She might have been a calming influence, someone who helped him wrestle with his doubts and fears. Do you think Ahsoka, staying by Anakin's side, could have stopped him from turning to the dark side? Or was that path inevitable? Also, how would Ahsoka's place in the Jedi Order evolve? She was already a skilled fighter and a natural leader, but would staying in the Order mean she gets promoted, maybe even to the Jedi Council someday? And if so, would her experiences and outlook push the Order to change from within? Remember, Ahsoka was always more willing to question the strict Jedi rules, so her voice could have sparked reforms. Now, what about the bigger picture during the Clone Wars? Ahsoka was a crucial commander in many battles, but after she left, her role shifted. She was known for compassion and tactical brilliance, so her continued presence could have boosted morale and effectiveness. And then there's the question, Ahsoka's survival after the Purge in the original story was because she wasn't officially a Jedi at that point, but if she stayed, would she have faced that brutal betrayal directly? Could her close ties with Anakin and the other Jedi have helped her survive or resist? Would she have been a key figure in trying to stop the Empire early on? Let's not forget her role in the future. In the original timeline, after leaving the Jedi, Ahsoka carved her own path, eventually joining the Rebel Alliance. If she stayed, would she have still taken on that role? Or would she have been bound by Jedi rules and traditions, maybe missing out on becoming the independent, forceful character who fights for justice in her own way? This also raises an intriguing question about the Jedi themselves. Would Ahsoka's continued presence force the Order to reconsider its approach? Maybe her experiences and perspective could have softened some of their rigidity or helped prevent their downfall. Or maybe she would have clashed more with the Council, trying to push them into a new direction. And what about the wider galaxy? Ahsoka was always a beacon of hope and morality for many. With her in the Jedi Order, would the Republic's reputation have been stronger? Would the citizens have trusted the Jedi more? And could her example have inspired others to stand up against corruption and darkness earlier? So many possibilities come from just this one change. The idea of Ahsoka staying with the Jedi forces us to rethink the whole story. Let's imagine how the galaxy unfolds with Ahsoka staying loyal to the Jedi Order. Her choice to stay wouldn't just affect her personally, it would ripple through every corner of the Clone Wars and beyond. One of the first things that comes to mind is how Ahsoka's continued presence might change the Jedi Order's internal dynamics. She was never one to blindly follow rules, but if she stayed, maybe she would have become a catalyst for reform. The Order was stuck in tradition and often blind to its own flaws. Ahsoka, with her sharp instincts and moral compass, might have challenged them to rethink their approach to justice and compassion. Would the Jedi have become less rigid and more connected to the people they swore to protect? Her relationship with Anakin would be another major factor. Anakin was one of the most powerful Jedi, but also one of the most conflicted. He struggled with anger, fear, and attachment. Ahsoka was one of the few who saw through his tough exterior. If she stayed by his side, could she have helped ground him? Or maybe she would have been pulled into his inner turmoil and risked losing herself in the process. It's fascinating to consider how much impact a trusted friend can have on someone battling darkness within. And then there's the war itself. Ahsoka was an incredible leader and fighter, known for her courage and quick thinking. With her in the ranks, the Republic's campaigns might have gone differently. Would battles have been less brutal? Could she have saved lives by using her compassion to negotiate or find alternative solutions? Or would her loyalty have meant more sacrifice and bloodshed as she fought harder for the Jedi cause? The big turning point, though, is Order 66. In the original timeline, Ahsoka left the Jedi before the Purge, which is partly why she survived. But what if she was still a Jedi when the clones turned on them? Would she have been targeted like the others? Maybe her close connection with Anakin could have saved her, or maybe not. It's hard to say how much influence Anakin had when he became Vader, but it's interesting to wonder if Ahsoka's presence could have changed the outcome of that dark day. If she survived, would she have joined the rebellion from the start, or would she have stayed in hiding, working quietly to rebuild what was lost? Her journey after leaving the Order was one of independence and self-discovery. Would staying mean she never found that freedom, or would it give her a stronger foundation to fight from within? There's also the question of how other Jedi would react to her staying. Would they respect her for her strength and insight, or would they resent her for challenging the status quo? The Jedi Council wasn't always welcoming to dissenting voices, and Ahsoka's return to loyalty might not erase the wounds from her trial and departure. Could she have healed those rifts, or would they have deepened? And what about the galaxy at large? The Jedi were supposed to be peacekeepers, but many people saw them as distant or even oppressive. Ahsoka, with her compassion and willingness to connect, might have helped bridge that gap. Could she have helped restore faith in the Jedi among the people? Would her example inspire a new generation of Jedi who balance strength with empathy? Then there's Palpatine. With Ahsoka in the Order and possibly influencing Anakin, Palpatine's plans could have faced a real obstacle. He thrived on chaos and division. A united Jedi Order, strengthened by Ahsoka's presence, might have uncovered his schemes sooner, or resisted his influence better. Could the Sith have been stopped before the Empire rose? But nothing in Star Wars is simple. Staying in the Order might have put Ahsoka in impossible situations. She might have been forced to follow orders she disagreed with, or compromise her values. Would she have been able to maintain her sense of self, or would the Order have worn her down? That tension between loyalty and personal ethics is at the heart of her story. So, looking back, how do you see it? These questions make her story so rich and why her character resonates with so many. Sometimes the biggest impact comes from the choices we make when things get hard, and Ahsoka's choice to leave or stay is one of those moments that could have reshaped everything. That moment on Cloud City when Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader face off remains one of the most unforgettable scenes in Star Wars. Vader reveals he's Luke's father. For Luke, that truth shakes the foundation of everything he thought he knew about himself and his place in the galaxy. In the original story, Luke rejects Vader's offer to join him and instead chooses to escape, holding tight to his ideals and hope. But imagining the alternative, Luke accepting Vader's offer and joining the dark side, changes everything. It flips the story on its head, reshaping characters, relationships, and the fate of the galaxy itself. Luke's decision to join Vader wouldn't be a simple choice born from ambition or desire for power. It would come from a place of deep pain and confusion. He just learned that the man he thought was a ruthless enemy is actually his father. On top of that, Luke worries about his friends and the rebellion's survival. With the weight of these revelations pressing down on him, the idea of standing beside Vader might feel like the only way to survive, the only way to protect those he cares about. It's a desperate, raw choice rather than a calculated one. With Luke stepping into Vader's shadow, the Empire gains more than just a powerful ally. It gains a symbol of ultimate dominance, the son of the galaxy's most feared enforcer. The dynamic between Vader and Luke would be complicated, layered with tension. Luke's natural compassion and hope clash with Vader's cold, relentless pursuit of order through fear. Their alliance would be uneasy but undeniably formidable. The ripple effect hits the rebellion hard and fast. Losing Luke to Vader is a crushing blow to morale. Leia, who shares Luke's blood and fought alongside him, is left with a mix of grief, confusion, and anger. Han Solo's protective nature would ignite into fierce determination to rescue or confront Luke. The rebellion's sense of hope, the belief that a new generation of Jedi could restore balance, is shaken to its core. Their brightest star, fading into darkness, forces them to regroup and question if they can win at all. Palpatine, the ultimate puppet master, watches with calculated interest. Vader, finally bringing his son to the dark side, strengthens the Sith's hold on the galaxy. However, Luke's unpredictable nature introduces a new element. The Emperor would see Luke as a valuable asset, but also as someone who might disrupt his careful plans. With both Vader and Luke working together, the Sith's grip tightens. The galaxy feels the weight of their combined power in every corner. Luke's path of training and growth takes a sharp turn. Instead of learning patience, balance, and restraint under the guidance of Yoda and Obi-Wan, Luke dives headfirst into the dark side's power. His abilities develop rapidly, fueled by anger and pain, but also shaped by Vader's experience and harsh methods. The spark of light inside him fights for survival, but struggles against the overwhelming pull of darkness. His journey becomes one of internal conflict, battling the shadows that threaten to consume him. Leia's relationship with Luke changes drastically. The bond between siblings, once a source of strength, now becomes a painful reminder of loss and betrayal. Han's frustration and sorrow grow, fueling his determination to find a way to bring Luke back, or to fight him if necessary. The fractured bonds among the heroes add tension to the rebellion's efforts. Leadership faces new challenges as they cope with the loss of their symbol of hope. The galaxy itself darkens under the new alliance of Vader and Luke. The Empire's campaign against the rebellion intensifies with renewed ferocity. Systems that once resisted fall one after another, crushed by the overwhelming force of father and son united. The rebellion, battered and dispirited, scrambles to regroup, their fight looking bleaker than ever. This new Luke is a far cry from the hopeful farm boy who dreamed of freedom and justice. His character arc becomes one of tragedy and complexity. He is torn between the legacy of his father and the ideals instilled by his mentors. This inner struggle makes him both dangerous and sympathetic, a figure shaped by loss, power, and impossible choices. The stakes rise as the story twists into something darker. The balance between light and dark, a core theme of Star Wars, shifts in a way that feels heavier, less certain. The flicker of hope that once seemed unbreakable now struggles to survive in the shadow of this new alliance. Luke joining Vader creates a pivotal turning point with massive consequences. It's a tale of pain, power, and the costs of decisions made under pressure. The galaxy's future looks uncertain, and the familiar heroes must navigate a new, harsher reality. This version of the story strips away the comfort of victory and forces us to face what happens when hope is tested in the most brutal way. The impact of Luke's choice echoes across the stars, changing not just battles but hearts and minds. Luke's choice to join Vader changes everything in ways the galaxy never expected. The rebellion reels from the shock. Losing Luke isn't just losing a fighter, it's losing the symbol of hope they clung to through every battle. Leia feels the weight of that loss deeply. You can almost feel her heart break, right? Imagine seeing your brother suddenly standing on the opposite side of everything you believe in. How would you even begin to process that? For Leia, that moment is raw and personal. She struggles not just with grief, but with the urge to fight harder, to prove Luke's choice doesn't define the rebellion's fate. Han's reaction is different, but just as intense. He's furious, but there's also this desperate hope that somewhere inside Luke, the light still flickers. You probably remember how fiercely protective Han is of his friends. Now that protectiveness turns into a relentless drive to either save Luke or stop him if saving isn't possible. Every mission, every skirmish becomes personal. For Han, this isn't just a war against the Empire anymore. It's a battle for the soul of a friend who slipped away. Meanwhile, Vader finds himself in a complicated position. Training Luke pushes him to new heights, but also forces him to confront parts of himself he had buried long ago. Luke's strength with the Force grows fast under Vader's guidance, but it's not just raw power. There's a struggle happening inside Luke. He's caught between the pull of the dark side and that stubborn ember of hope and compassion he inherited from his mother and the Jedi teachings. It makes their relationship tense and unpredictable. I wonder how you'd feel in Vader's place, training your own son to embrace the darkness while knowing there's a part of him that fights against it. Palpatine watches all this with his usual calculated interest. Having both father and son aligned under the dark side is a dream come true for the Emperor. But he's cautious. Luke's unpredictability means the Emperor can't take anything for granted. Still, with Vader and Luke working together, the Empire's grip tightens across the galaxy. Planets that once resisted begin to fall faster, and the rebellion's situation becomes desperate. The rebellion's leadership faces new challenges. Without Luke's hopeful presence, they need to hold the line in ways they never imagined. Leia steps up, her resolve hardening as she carries the burden of not only fighting the Empire, but also trying to bring her brother back. It's a weight that shapes her into an even stronger leader, but you can feel the emotional toll behind every decision she makes. Han's determination drives him deeper into danger, sometimes recklessly so, just to protect what remains of his friends and fight the growing darkness. Luke's training continues with Vader pushing him to embrace his power fully. His abilities grow stronger, fueled by anger and pain, but the struggle inside him remains. He's no longer the hopeful farm boy from Tatooine, but a young man wrestling with the legacy of his father and of the teachings of his mentors. The dark side offers power and control, but Luke's heart still holds onto the lessons of mercy and justice. That tension makes him unpredictable, sometimes ruthless, sometimes hesitant. Leia and Han's bond is tested like never before. Both wrestle with fear and hope, trying to hold on to each other and their fight. The loss of Luke changes their dynamic, but it also pushes them to become more than they were. They represent the rebellion spirit, fighting not just for survival, but to restore the light Luke once believed in. The galaxy feels the impact of this alliance. Vader and Luke together are a force that shakes worlds. The Empire's reach extends further, and resistance seems more fragile. But with darkness growing, so does the spark of rebellion. Heroes emerge from unexpected places, driven by the need to fight even when hope seems dim. The story becomes less about clear lines between good and evil, and more about complex choices, sacrifices, and the messy reality of war. This twist in the story forces us to rethink Luke's character. He's not just a hero or villain, but someone shaped by pain, loyalty, and conflict. His journey reflects how sometimes the hardest battles happen inside us. That makes his story deeply human, even amidst galactic-scale events. Leia Organa, growing up with Jedi training from an early age, would have changed the whole story in ways that ripple across the galaxy. Imagine her not just as a diplomat and rebel leader, but as someone trained to wield the Force with skill and purpose from childhood. That early connection to the Force would shape how she sees the world, how she fights, and how she leads. Instead of relying mostly on politics and courage, Leia would combine all that with the calm focus and power that comes from Jedi discipline. Being trained as a Jedi early on means Leia would have a deeper understanding of her own abilities and the Force itself. She would develop skills in lightsaber combat, Force powers, and meditation long before the rebellion really took shape. This would give her a unique edge in negotiations, battles, and personal conflicts. The way she carries herself, her confidence, and the way others perceive her would shift. People might see her not only as a princess and a rebel, but as a true warrior with a profound connection to the Force. This also changes her relationship with Luke and the rest of her family. If Leia was trained early, perhaps Luke wouldn't feel the same heavy burden of being the last Jedi or the sole hope. They could have trained together, growing stronger side by side, sharing experiences and challenges. Their bond would deepen, with both siblings understanding the Force in their own way and supporting each other in the fight against the Empire. You can imagine how Leia's early Jedi training would affect the rebellion. She would be a natural leader on the battlefield and in strategy meetings, combining her Force abilities with political savvy. Her presence would inspire others, not just because she's royalty, but because she commands respect through her skills and inner strength. Would the rebellion have grown faster or been more effective with Leia's Jedi abilities from the start? It's easy to think so. Her ability to sense danger, influence others, and fight in lightsaber duels could turn the tide in many encounters. At the same time, Leia's early training would come with challenges. Jedi training isn't just about power, it's about discipline, self-control, and sometimes sacrifice. Leia would face the pressure of balancing her personal emotions with the demands of being a Jedi. Growing up with this responsibility could shape her personality differently, more reserved or maybe more determined. It would be interesting to see how she handles those expectations while also being a princess and later a key figure in the rebellion. Her interactions with other characters would also shift. Think about how her relationship with Han Solo might change. Han's skepticism toward the Force and Jedi ways would meet a Leia who understands the Force deeply and uses it naturally. Would that cause tension or mutual respect? Their dynamic could add new layers to their story. And what about her encounters with Vader and Palpatine? A Leia trained early as a Jedi would be a more formidable opponent for the Empire's dark forces, making her a prime target but also a beacon of hope. One thing to consider is how Leia's early Jedi training might influence her path after the original trilogy. With a stronger foundation in the Force, she might take on different roles within the Jedi Order or the galaxy's future. Would she become a master, a teacher, or someone who bridges the gap between the Jedi and the political worlds? Her unique blend of diplomacy and Jedi skills could create new possibilities for peace and justice. Overall, Leia trained as a Jedi early on would make the story richer and more complex. She wouldn't just be a side character or a love interest, but a central figure shaping the galaxy's fate with wisdom, power, and heart. How do you imagine her fighting alongside Luke, or facing off against the Sith? Picking up where we left off, Leia's early Jedi training changes everything beyond just her own abilities. It reshapes the rebellion, the Empire's response, and the very way the Force moves through the galaxy. She's not only a skilled warrior, but also a leader who blends calm focus with fierce determination. That combination makes her presence on the battlefield and in the halls of power undeniable. Her approach to leadership becomes more balanced, blending careful planning with decisive action. Years of Jedi training give her insight into timing, patience, and knowing when to act. Instead of rushing into danger, Leia moves with purpose, using her senses to anticipate threats and opportunities. That ability shifts many key moments for the rebellion. Battles become smarter, losses fewer, and victories more meaningful. The Empire faces a challenge unlike any other, one where a powerful Jedi stands at the forefront of the fight for freedom. Leia's influence reaches beyond just the rebellion's military side. The Force connects her to those around her in subtle ways. She senses the feelings and fears of her allies, calming doubts with a steady presence. That kind of connection builds trust naturally. People don't just follow her because she's royalty or a great strategist. They feel her strength, the calm power behind her words and actions. That kind of leadership inspires loyalty and courage in others, helping hold the fragile alliance of rebels together. Her relationship with Luke grows into a partnership built on equal footing. Both trained in the Force from a young age, they share more than just family ties. They share experience, understanding, and challenges. Their bond strengthens as they push each other to grow, learning not just from their successes, but also their failures. Leia's fiery spirit balances Luke's idealism, creating a dynamic that moves their fight forward in unexpected ways. This sibling team makes the struggle against the dark side feel more hopeful and grounded. Han Solo's story shifts alongside Leia's. His natural skepticism about the Force meets her deep knowledge and steady confidence. Instead of dismissing her abilities, Han respects the skill and wisdom she carries. That respect leads to a relationship built on mutual support rather than doubt. Leia's strength brings out new sides of Han, and he, in turn, grounds her in reality. Their partnership becomes a fusion of faith and practicality, a balance that makes both stronger. The Empire faces a serious threat in Leia's early Jedi training. She becomes a prime target, not just for her leadership, but because of her Force abilities. Vader and Palpatine recognize the danger she poses as someone who stands between them and complete control of the galaxy. Every confrontation with Leia is charged with tension and power. Their encounters test her limits and resolve, pushing her to draw on all her training and inner strength. The stakes rise as the battle between light and dark grows more intense with her in the fight. Leia's impact reaches far into the future, beyond the original trilogy. With a solid foundation in the Force, she steps into new roles: teacher, leader, and bridge between Jedi and the galaxy's political forces. Her unique perspective, forged through years of balancing diplomacy, brings fresh ideas to rebuilding the Jedi Order. Instead of strict detachment, Leia's approach embraces emotion as a source of strength and connection. That shift opens new paths for the Force and those who follow it. Her personal journey holds moments of challenge too. Jedi training demands control and sacrifice, and Leia faces temptation from the dark side as sharply as anyone. Her passion and strong emotions don't disappear. They become tools she learns to channel rather than suppress. The pressure to balance all her roles, from princess to warrior to symbol of hope, shapes her in ways that deepen her character. Her story isn't just about power, it's about choices, growth, and the courage to stand firm in a galaxy torn by conflict. Leia, trained as a Jedi early, doesn't just add a new skill set to her character. It changes the entire narrative, shifting power dynamics and opening possibilities for the galaxy's future. She becomes a figure who blends strength, wisdom, and compassion, someone whose journey redefines what it means to be a Jedi and a leader. This path makes her one of the most complex and inspiring characters in the Star Wars saga, shaping not only her fate, but the fate of everyone around her. Imagine for a moment that the legendary duel between Yoda and Sidious ended very differently. Instead of retreating in defeat, Yoda overpowers the Sith Lord, striking down Palpatine and changing the course of galactic history in a way few could have predicted. This victory wouldn't just be a simple win in a fight, it would ripple across the galaxy, affecting everything from the fate of the Republic to the future of the Jedi Order. Yoda defeating Sidious would be a massive shock to the Empire's plans. Palpatine was not just a political mastermind, but the embodiment of the dark side's strength. His fall would leave a power vacuum at the heart of the Sith and the Empire itself. Without their Dark Lord to lead, the Empire's grip on the galaxy would weaken, and the rebellion's struggle would suddenly gain a powerful boost. The sense of fear and oppression that hung over planets for years would start to lift, but that doesn't mean peace would come easily. The Jedi Order, which had been hunted and nearly destroyed, would find new hope. Yoda surviving and winning would serve as a symbol of resilience and strength. His victory would inspire Jedi scattered across the galaxy to come out of hiding and begin rebuilding. The lessons learned during the Clone Wars and the brutal purge would be fresh in their minds. They would have to figure out how to adapt to a galaxy that had changed dramatically, with old enemies weakened but new challenges emerging. The Jedi would face the difficult task of regaining trust from those who had lost faith in them during the Republic's fall. Yoda's role would evolve beyond being a wise counselor to becoming a leader in this new era. His centuries of experience, combined with his recent victory, would give him the authority to guide the Jedi in new directions. But leadership also means hard decisions. Would Yoda allow the Jedi to return to their old ways, or would he push for reform, acknowledging their failures that contributed to the rise of Sidious? This moment would be a crossroads for the Jedi philosophy itself, balancing tradition with the need for change. The political landscape would also be in flux. The Republic, already fractured and weakened, would face the challenge of reuniting under new leadership. Without Palpatine's manipulations, senators and planetary leaders would need to find common ground, but old rivalries and distrust wouldn't disappear overnight. Yoda's presence might be a stabilizing force, but would the galaxy be ready to follow a Jedi in a political role after so much turmoil? The balance of power would be delicate, with factions eager to shape the future according to their own interests. The fate of key figures, like Anakin Skywalker, would also shift dramatically. Without Sidious to tempt him fully into the dark side, Anakin's path might be less tragic, or take an entirely different turn. Maybe he never becomes Vader, or maybe his destiny is something no one predicted. How would his relationships with Obi-Wan, Padme, and even Yoda himself change? The personal stories intertwined with galactic events would ripple out, creating new tensions, alliances, and outcomes. This victory would also send shockwaves through the Sith themselves. Sidious's death would create confusion and desperation among any remaining Sith followers or apprentices. Would they rise to challenge Yoda, or would the Sith tradition collapse without their leader? The dark side's influence might retreat for a time, but the galaxy has a way of cycling through light and dark. How long could peace hold if the shadow of the Sith is still out there, waiting for the next opportunity? The nature of the Force itself might feel different in this new era. Yoda, having bested the most powerful Sith, might seek to explore deeper understandings of balance between light and dark. His victory could spark a philosophical shift in how the Jedi approach their powers and responsibilities. Would he teach that the Force is more than just light versus dark, or reinforce the old divide? The way future Jedi are trained and how they see their place in the galaxy might transform. All of this makes you wonder, what would the galaxy look like years after Yoda's win? How would ordinary people feel, knowing that the dark shadow that loomed for so long is finally gone? And how would Yoda himself carry the weight of this victory, knowing that peace is always fragile and the struggle between light and dark never truly ends? With Sidious gone, the galaxy doesn't suddenly become a peaceful place. In fact, the power vacuum left by the Emperor's death shakes things up more than many expect. The empire built around his rule and fear starts to crumble from within. Governors and warlords begin jockeying for control, each trying to claim a piece of the fractured empire. Without Sidious's iron grip, old resentments flare up. This period could become chaotic, with new conflicts sparking across systems that were barely held together under the Empire's rule. Yoda, now more than just a Jedi Master, has to navigate this unstable political landscape. He's wise and experienced, but has spent most of his life away from politics. Suddenly, he's thrust into a role where his decisions could shape the future of entire star systems. His first challenge is to help create a new order, one where the Republic's ideals aren't just empty words. But convincing factions to work together will be difficult. Many remember the Republic's fall and associate Jedi with its failures. Gaining trust won't be easy, and Yoda knows that rebuilding will require patience and constant effort. Meanwhile, the Jedi Order begins its slow recovery. Survivors who fled the Purge start emerging from hiding, inspired by Yoda's victory. Training new Jedi becomes a priority, but the Order faces tough questions. How do they avoid the mistakes that led to their near extinction? Yoda is focused on teaching balance. The trauma of the Clone Wars lingers, and many Jedi struggle to reconcile their role as peacekeepers with the reality of war. Yoda's leadership helps them find new purpose, but the path forward is uncertain. The shadow of the dark side doesn't vanish with Sidious's death. Other dark side users, Sith or not, see opportunity in the chaos. Some try to gather followers, others work quietly in the shadows. Yoda is aware that the threat is far from over. His victory is significant, but it doesn't mean the dark side is defeated. This constant tension adds urgency to the Jedi's rebuilding efforts and forces Yoda to remain vigilant. The galaxy is fragile, and every decision could tip the balance toward light or dark. Anakin Skywalker's fate takes a sharp turn here. Without Sidious corrupting him fully, Anakin's internal struggle might find resolution in a different way. He could return to the Jedi Order, seeking redemption and healing. Yoda's presence and guidance would be crucial in helping him walk that path. This possibility changes the dynamic between the Jedi. Having a figure like Anakin working alongside Yoda and the rebels could inspire hope and unity. But it also raises questions about trust given Anakin's past and the scars he carries. On a personal level, Yoda faces challenges as well. Victory over Sidious places a heavy burden on him. The responsibility of rebuilding a broken galaxy and preventing new darkness from rising weighs on his shoulders. He's lived for centuries, but the future now feels more uncertain than ever. Yoda's wisdom is tempered by the knowledge that peace is never permanent. He has to prepare the Jedi and the galaxy for the long struggle ahead, knowing that his own time may be limited. The philosophical impact of Yoda's victory also reaches beyond politics and war. The Force itself seems to respond to this new era. Yoda's teachings begin to evolve. This shift influences the next generation of Jedi, who grow up with a broader view of the Force's nature. The old conflicts don't disappear, but the approach to them changes, opening the door to new kinds of Force users and new possibilities for balance. You might wonder how the galaxy's ordinary people would react to these changes. For decades, fear and oppression shaped daily life. With Sidious gone and the Empire weakening, hope would start to spread. But uncertainty remains. Would people trust the Jedi after all they've been through? Would the New Republic live up to its promises, or fall prey to corruption again? These questions remind us that history is never simple or predictable. Yoda's victory starts a new chapter, but the story of the galaxy is far from finished. Looking ahead, this alternate path suggests a galaxy slowly healing but still full of tension. The dark side lurks in hidden corners, new leaders emerge, and old wounds take time to mend. Yoda's win is a turning point, a moment when light gains ground, but the future demands constant effort and vigilance. It makes you think about how fragile peace really is, and how much depends on the choices of a few. Let's say the Battle of Yavin plays out just a bit differently. Luke Skywalker, flying down that narrow trench, takes his shot, but misses. Maybe his torpedoes don't hit the exhaust port clean, or maybe Vader shoots him down before he even gets the chance. Either way, the Death Star survives. The Rebellion's greatest opportunity slips through their fingers, and the most powerful weapon in the galaxy remains fully operational. That one change shifts everything. First of all, the Rebel base on Yavin 4 doesn't survive for long. With the tracking device still on the Millennium Falcon, the Empire already knows exactly where they are. So within minutes of the failed attack, Tarkin gives the order and wipes the entire moon off the map. Every pilot who flew in that battle, every strategist, every leader who managed to organize the rebellion into something real, they're all gone. The immediate effect is obvious. The rebellion's back is broken. Without Yavin 4, without its core leadership, it becomes a scattered, disjointed mess. Some cells might survive in distant systems, but there's no coordinated resistance anymore. They're back to being a whisper in the dark, running and hiding, with no real firepower. And worse, the galaxy watches it happen. Billions of citizens see what happens to those who stand against the Empire. The Death Star is no longer just a threat, it's proof. Defiance equals extinction. Now imagine how the Empire responds in this version of the timeline. The destruction of the Rebel base would be a major propaganda victory. Tarkin and Vader would be hailed as the men who saved the galaxy from terrorists. News networks across the core worlds would spin it into a story of peace and order being restored, all thanks to the might of the Death Star. And without anyone strong enough to challenge them, the Empire can now begin using the station to enforce complete control across the galaxy. No need for ground invasions or drawn-out campaigns anymore. Just park the Death Star in orbit and issue a threat. Comply or be erased. And that brings us to the political side of things. With the Death Star still active and the rebellion crushed, Palpatine's power becomes absolute. The Imperial Senate, which had already been dissolved, doesn't just fade into history. It becomes a forgotten relic. There's no one left to question him. No more need for slow manipulation or backroom deals. The Empire becomes a true dictatorship in broad daylight. If you're a governor or a planetary leader, your only job now is to obey. Fear replaces diplomacy. Think about the Jedi too, or at least what's left of them. Obi-Wan is dead. Yoda is still in hiding. Luke, in this version, probably doesn't live long after the failed assault. Even if he survives the battle, he's now a hunted fugitive. And without Obi-Wan to guide him, and no rebellion to protect him, his journey as a Jedi would be short-lived. The legacy of the Jedi fades even faster in this world. Vader's position also shifts dramatically. In the original timeline, his failure at Yavin was a mark against him. He lost the Death Star, but here, he's the one who protected it. If he manages to shoot down Luke or disable enough rebel fighters to save the station, he gets credit for the Empire's biggest victory. That could strengthen his standing with the Emperor, making him even more dangerous. He wouldn't be sent to Mustafar to wipe out separatist leftovers. He'd be leading galactic military campaigns, or worse, using the Death Star to settle old grudges. Vader, with unchecked power and full Imperial support, is not someone the galaxy is ready for. And then there's the Death Star itself. It doesn't just remain a symbol, it becomes the tool Palpatine always wanted it to be. Dissent doesn't grow in this galaxy. People don't gather in cantinas and speak quietly about hope. They keep their heads down, because they've seen what happens when you don't. Whole cities, continents, maybe even entire systems vanish overnight. Alderaan wasn't the last, it was just the beginning. And this time, there's no one left to stop the pattern from repeating. You can also picture what happens to places like Cloud City, Mon Cala, or Naboo. Any planet suspected of harboring rebels, or even sympathizing with them, would face destruction. It wouldn't matter how important they were culturally, politically, or economically. If you hesitate to obey Imperial law, if your governor shows signs of disloyalty, the Death Star shows up, and suddenly, your entire history is gone. Monuments, art, families turn to dust in a blink. So by the end of that year, the galaxy isn't just afraid, it's silent. The Empire doesn't need to fight anymore. They've already won. No one can challenge a government that holds the power to delete you from existence at any moment. Fear becomes the law of the land. If the Death Star survives, the rebellion doesn't just take a hit, it gets broken apart. Whatever's left of the Rebel Alliance ends up scattered. People start going dark, systems disconnect, and instead of a coordinated effort, you're left with a galaxy full of isolated groups trying to stay alive. Nobody knows who to trust. Communication becomes a huge risk, and every transmission could give away a location. That changes how the rest of the galaxy reacts too. Think about the planets watching from the sidelines, the ones that were maybe considering helping the rebels or at least sympathizing with them. After Yavin, they're seeing the Empire prove it can wipe out anyone, anywhere, and no one will be there to stop it. That kind of power doesn't invite resistance, it scares people into silence. Whole systems would start locking down just to avoid being seen as troublemakers. It becomes easier to comply than to question anything. You'd also start seeing the way local leadership changes. Governors, sector authorities, even city officials on distant worlds. They all begin operating under a cloud of fear. They're not making decisions for the good of their people anymore. They're managing risk. Every choice, every policy, every movement gets filtered through one question. Will this attract attention? And if the answer is even slightly uncertain, they pull back. Over time, that fear seeps into daily life. People stop speaking freely, creativity dies out, trust disappears. And here's something else to think about. How do you fight a war when the enemy doesn't need to send troops anymore? The Empire wouldn't rely on huge invasions in this timeline. They wouldn't need to. The Death Star becomes the centerpiece of control. You don't have to deploy a legion of stormtroopers when a single orbiting threat can shut down a planet overnight. Fear becomes more effective than occupation. As a result, traditional military efforts fade out. Fewer stormtroopers are trained, fewer Star Destroyers are built, because the new strategy doesn't need them as much. Now imagine growing up in that kind of galaxy, not as a rebel or soldier, just a regular person trying to live your life. You're in school, or working a small job on some backwater world, and everyone around you is constantly looking over their shoulder. Nobody talks about politics, nobody shares news unless it's officially approved, and you're always aware that one wrong conversation might make someone disappear. That's not just a military state, it's a culture of silence. The bigger irony is that this massive weapon, meant to ensure long-term peace through fear, actually stifles everything. Trade slows down, art fades out, science stalls. Nobody wants to be innovative or expressive anymore. It draws too much attention. Engineers who once worked on ships or farming tech might now be pulled into military projects. Universities and libraries shrink, and new ideas are treated like risks. Even the Empire's own development starts to suffer because nobody wants to make a move that feels unsafe. Now, if you're wondering what happens to characters like Leia in all of this, her path changes entirely. Assuming she survives Yavin, she's suddenly without allies, resources, or even a safe place to rest. Her mission turns from leading a movement to just staying alive and maybe trying to find a way to reconnect with what's left. But those connections get harder to make. Everyone is afraid. Even the most loyal allies are now thinking twice before getting involved again. Same thing with Luke. He doesn't get the defining moment that turned him into a symbol. No trench run, no last-second shot, no ceremony. Just failure and the weight of it. He might still believe in the Force, maybe he still trains, but there's no guidance, no support system, and no real reason to think he can change anything. Without that first big win, Luke's journey doesn't really begin the same way. He's not a leader in this version. He's just one more person wondering what to do next. The Jedi legacy fades even faster now, with no spark to reignite public interest, no visible acts of hope or heroism. They slip further into myth. The name doesn't inspire anything anymore. It becomes something people whisper about, not something they follow. And as the Empire doubles down on control, even those whispers start disappearing. And what about the Death Star itself? It's still this massive floating fortress that needs to be maintained, moved, protected. The Empire would keep it travelling, always appearing in new systems to remind people that it's still active. It becomes the heart of their power structure, but also their biggest crutch. Let's go back to Naboo, to that duel in the Theed generator complex. The energy gates flicker open, Maul presses forward, and Obi-Wan, caught in that desperate moment after Qui-Gon's death, tries to hold his ground. But this time, he doesn't make it out. Maul is faster, sharper, and Obi-Wan doesn't get the opening he needs. From that moment on, the entire timeline shifts. Qui-Gon is already gone, and now Obi-Wan joins him. Which means one big thing immediately. Anakin never gets trained by Obi-Wan. Now you're probably wondering, does the Council just take over his training? Remember, the Council never really wanted to train Anakin in the first place. It was Qui-Gon who pushed for it, Obi-Wan who honoured his dying wish. Without either of them, Anakin's future is hanging by a thread. So what happens to him? Well, the Jedi probably take him in for a while, but without someone personally invested in his growth, Anakin doesn't get the mentorship he needs. He's powerful, sure, but also emotional, impulsive, and carrying more fear than most Padawans. If they try to treat him like any other student, the cracks start showing early. He feels rejected, misunderstood, maybe even resented by the other kids who don't really know what to make of him. And then there's Maul. In the original timeline, he gets cut in half and disappears for years. Here, he walks away alive. The Sith don't lose their apprentice. Sidious doesn't have to find Dooku or start looking for someone else to carry out his bigger plans. He already has Maul, and this Maul has proven himself by killing 2 Jedi, including one that was meant to be the Chosen One's master. So Sidious shifts gears. With Maul at his side, the plans for the Clone Wars begin to take shape even faster. There's no need to play as many games with Dooku or manipulate as many pieces. Maul's presence gives Sidious more flexibility. He already has a deadly enforcer, and now that enforcer is feared across the galaxy. The Jedi can't spin Maul's survival as a fluke anymore. He's a real threat, one they failed to eliminate, twice. Here's where things start escalating fast. The Jedi Council, already shaken by the loss of 2 Jedi in one duel, is now fully on alert. But even then, they don't really understand what they're dealing with. They know the Sith are back, but they don't know who Sidious is, and Maul isn't some talkative villain looking to spill secrets. He's focused, brutal, and completely loyal, at least for now. Meanwhile, Anakin starts drifting. Maybe he's passed around between masters, maybe the Council tries to train him as a kind of group effort, but that doesn't work for someone like him. He doesn't just need lessons, he needs connection, grounding, someone who understands where he comes from. Without that, his trust in the Jedi starts to fade early. He still wants to be great, but now that drive starts twisting into frustration. And with Maul alive, Sidious has more options. He doesn't need to corrupt Anakin right away. He's not in a rush. Instead, he lets Anakin stew in that isolation. Let's say a few years pass and Anakin is still a Padawan. Or worse, he's been sidelined, not progressing the way he should. That makes him vulnerable. Not necessarily to the dark side right away, but to any voice that makes him feel seen, valued, powerful. You see where this is going? Now imagine Maul and Anakin crossing paths early. Maybe it's a skirmish, maybe a mission gone wrong, but Sidious arranges it. He watches closely. Anakin isn't ready for someone like Maul. There's no duel where he comes out on top, not yet. But the encounter plants a seed. Anakin sees what power looks like when it's unleashed without hesitation. And for a moment, he questions everything. Why are the Jedi always holding him back? Why are they so afraid of his potential? That's how Sidious works. He doesn't force anything. He waits for the right moments, lets people make the choices he wants them to make. With Maul still alive and serving as his blade, Sidious can play a slower, more dangerous game. Now take a second to think about the state of the galaxy. There's no Dooku to lead the Separatists, not yet. But Sidious still needs a war. So maybe Maul steps into that role too, or maybe Sidious reshapes the conflict entirely. Either way, the Clone Wars don't play out the same way. Maul isn't interested in politics, but Sidious might use him to wipe out certain targets, remove obstacles, and create just enough chaos to justify emergency powers for Palpatine's political persona. And on the Jedi side, morale is shaken. Losing Qui-Gon was already a blow. Losing Obi-Wan too? That creates real doubt. It forces them to ask hard questions. Are they prepared for this new threat? Have they grown complacent? The Order starts training more aggressively, preparing for something bigger, but their structure stays the same. They don't adapt fast enough. Meanwhile, Anakin continues to slip through the cracks, and Sidious, watching from the shadows, is still waiting. Maul becomes the face of the Sith in the shadows, and he doesn't have to hide in the Outer Rim or spiral into madness like he did in the original timeline. He's working, quietly, right under the nose of the Republic. Without Dooku stepping in, Maul might seem like an unlikely leader for the Separatists. But think about how Sidious operates. He doesn't need Maul giving speeches in the Senate. He just needs someone to cause enough disruption to force the galaxy into war. The charismatic political role Dooku played could be handed off to someone else, maybe a disgruntled senator, or even a corrupted Jedi like Pong Krell, someone who could function as a public front while Maul handles the real damage behind the scenes. But while Sidious reshapes the future with Maul, there's still one person quietly drifting toward the center of it all: Anakin. With Obi-Wan gone and no strong attachment to any other Jedi, Anakin's path grows darker by the year. The Jedi still train him, but they're watching him more than guiding him. Every time he gets angry, someone tells him to control it. Every time he shows fear or doubt, someone tells him to let go. But no one really shows him how. They expect him to be what the prophecy says, yet give him none of the support Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan might have offered. Now here's where things start connecting. As Maul gets more involved in Sidious's long game, he starts taking a greater interest in Anakin. Not directly, not yet, but he starts studying him, watching from a distance. And maybe one day he sees what Sidious saw, that this boy isn't just powerful. He's angry, conflicted, and already questioning the system that raised him. So what happens when Maul decides to reach out? Not through violence, not yet, through manipulation. Think about how much more dangerous Maul becomes if he stops swinging his saber for just a second and starts using his mind. If Sidious trains him in patience, in deception, in the art of corruption, Maul becomes more than a blunt weapon. He becomes a tool of influence. Picture this, a staged mission where Maul and Anakin cross paths again. Only this time, Maul doesn't try to kill him. He lets him go, leaves a message, plants a doubt, tells him something the Jedi wouldn't. And that single moment begins a slow unraveling. Anakin starts to wonder, who's really lying to him? Who's holding him back? It's not a sudden flip, it's a slow shift, stretched out over years, where each frustration pushes him a little further away from the Order. The Council notices it but chalks it up to his age or his background. They assume he'll grow out of it. They assume wrong. Meanwhile, with Maul at Sidious's side, Order 66 doesn't need to rely so much on clones and contingency codes. It could be more personal, more direct. Maul could be sent to assassinate key Jedi before the war even ends. Or maybe the war doesn't follow the same structure at all. If Maul survives and stays loyal, Sidious can reshape the entire chessboard long before Anakin becomes Darth Vader. Let's zoom in for a second on what the Jedi Order looks like in this alternate timeline. 2 prominent Jedi lost on Naboo, the Chosen One raised in an atmosphere of control and paranoia, war spreading without clear lines of loyalty. Even without the separatist crisis happening the same way, tensions across the galaxy still boil over. The Jedi become enforcers rather than diplomats, and when Jedi are sent to handle chaos, they often create more of it. Maul keeps pushing. Missions that were once simple negotiations now turn into ambushes. Clone troopers are still created, maybe even earlier than before, depending on how the Camino project is used. But instead of being a clean response to a separatist uprising, they become a reaction to a galaxy that's falling apart piece by piece. And now we come to the turning point. Eventually, Anakin snaps. He's not going to turn during some dramatic lava duel or balcony monologue. He's going to turn when it finally makes sense to him, when the Jedi push him one step too far, or when someone like Maul offers him the one thing the Jedi never gave: understanding. Not truth, not freedom, just someone who sees him, who listens, who lets him be angry without calling it dangerous. Would Sidious still name him Darth Vader? Maybe. Maybe he chooses another name. Maybe Maul gets to name him. But regardless of the title, Anakin joins them. Now Sidious has 2 apprentices: the brute strength and speed of Maul, and the raw force potential of Anakin. He doesn't need to pick just one. He could pit them against each other, keep them sharp, keep them loyal through rivalry, or he could rewire the rule of 2 entirely, creating a new Sith doctrine designed for dominance, not secrecy.